While the military defense leaves many unanswered questions, even more doubts arise when taking a closer look at the 19 alleged terrorists. The first problem is that apparently these guys could barely fly at all. While they are known to have taken some flight lessons with small single-engine airplanes, none of them had ever flown a jet before in their life, let alone a large commercial airliner, which is obviously a league of its own. Adam Shaw is an acrobatic pilot and a flight instructor with 6,000 hours of experience, half of which spent flying upside down.
For people who are really piss-poor student pilots, to be able to get in the cockpit of big jets and fly them as accurately as they were flown, at close to max speed, and be able to hit the trade towers.
The idea that someone could make the transition from a small single-engine plane traveling at 100 miles an hour to a commercial airliner traveling at 500 miles an hour without a long, exhaustive training is very hard to believe.
People don't realize that to hand fly an airliner at those speeds is extremely difficult, and particularly if you're a novice, because a novice that's learned in little airplanes, they over-control everything.
To justify this apparently impossible transition, the debunkers maintained that the terrorist had spent some time in flight simulators, and that the equipment they encountered in the Boeing cockpits on September 11 was similar to the simulators they had trained on. But this is false. For example, the only simulator Hani Hanjour is known to have ever trained in is the Boeing 737, an airplane designed in the 70s, with a totally different cockpit from the 757 he is alleged to have hijacked on September 11. If anything, his training would have confused him, not helped him in any way. Another argument by the debunkers is that all the hijackers really had to do once in the cockpits was to set the automatic pilot in order to reach their targets.
Perché una banalità sconcertante, me lo sono fatto spiegare, è come fare un SMS sul telefonino. E l'aereo va automaticamente a raggiungere la destinazione richiesta. Quindi io faccio, non so, JFK e lui mi porta all'aeroporto Kennedy. Appena io sono in vista dell'aeroporto Kennedy, prendo in mano i comandi e mi schianto contro le torri.
But this is hardly what happened on September 11. Dave Bottiglia is the air traffic controller who followed the hijacking of United 175.
Now as I'm watching, United 175 makes a hard left-hand turn and starts climbing. Not only did he make a sharp turn, but he also climbed 3,000 feet in a matter of approximately 1 minute, which is a very fast rate of climb. This is something that we have never seen before.
After the sudden ascent, the plane started a breathtaking descent toward the ground.
We were counting down the altitudes, and they were descending right at the end at 10,000 feet per minute. That is absolutely unheard of for a commercial jet.
This is certainly not the way the automatic pilot would have taken you to Kennedy Airport.
It is unbelievable for the passengers in the back to withstand that type of force as they're descending. They're actually nosing the airplane down and doing it what I would call a power dive.
At 9:01 a.m., United 175 is hurtling at more than 400 miles per hour toward the Statue of Liberty and New York Harbor.
One of the controllers started counting out the altitudes, and he says, my God, he's going down at 8,000 feet a minute. Now it's 10,000 feet a minute. And he counted off 8, 6, 4, and he says, my God, he's in the ground on the next hit.
But he was not. According to the official version, Marwan al-Sheikhi, a 23-year-old who has never flown a jet before in his life, levels the course, visually identifies the target, and performs a spectacular banking maneuver that brings the 767 to hit the South Tower under the world's astonished eyes. Question. Marwan al-Sheikhi had never flown a jet before in his life, let alone a huge airliner. How was he able to perform ascents of 3,000 feet per minute and plunges of 10,000 feet per minute while keeping full control of the plane? And why would he want to take such unnecessary risks, including collisions with other airliners, instead of flying safely with the autopilot towards the intended target? Ziad Jarrah, the alleged hijacker of Flight 93, wasn't known for his piloting skills either. As reported by the 9/11 Commission in July 2001, he had asked to fly the Hudson Corridor near Manhattan with a small private plane. But because Hortman Flight School deemed Jarrah unfit to fly solo, he could fly this route only accompanied by an instructor. Yet we are asked to believe that only 2 months later, the same person was able to fully control a 100-ton airliner and perform some extreme descending maneuvers observed by Cleveland's air traffic controllers.
I see this plane climbed up from his assigned altitude to 35,000 feet to 41,000 feet, turned around and aimed right back at where we were, and descended rapidly. And when a plane descends too fast, the computer can't keep up with it.
Ziad Jarrah had never flown a jet before in his life, let alone a large airliner, and even his experience with small airplanes was rather poor. How could he perform a descent so fast that the computer can't keep up with it while maintaining full control of the plane? And why would he need to take such an unnecessary risk, including collisions with other airplanes, instead of safely flying with the autopilot towards the intended target? But the feat of the century must be awarded to Hani Hanjour, a hopeless amateur who is alleged to have been at the controls of American 77. As he finally reached Washington and had the Pentagon in sight, Hani Hanjour did not make the easy choice and just plunged the plane onto the roofs of the building. He instead disconnected the autopilot and performed a hand-flown, high-speed descending maneuver of 330 degrees that brought him to lose sight of the target again while forcing him to a much more difficult approach close to the ground. Seen from above, the Pentagon offers some 30 acres of unobstructed target. Hitting it anywhere on the roofs would have caused a major devastation and possibly thousands of casualties. Coming in from the side instead, the approach is filled with obstacles, and the target is reduced to a tiny strip of cement coming at you at 500 miles an hour. The debunkers, however, seem to have a good explanation for this apparently illogical maneuver.
Normalmente l'aereo dovrebbe scendere in picchiata. Allora si chiede a un pilota e il pilota ti dice subito guarda che quella è la manovra più difficile, la fa un pilota esperto. Un pilota di scarsa competenza usa l'aereo come se fosse un camion bomba, ossia vola orizzontalmente, vola basso, centra l'edificio.
This very question has already been posed to professional pilots, but the answer was not what Attivissimo claims.
Se lei dovesse simulare il volo di uno che vuole colpire il Pentagono,
se volessi essere sicuro lo colpirei sicuramente da questa parte qui.
Per essere sicuro arriverebbe dall'alto così.
Arrivando qui perché o si colpiscono questi edifici, diciamo i primi che vengono, oppure si colpiscono gli edifici che sono subito dopo, quindi si crea comunque un elevato danno.
Flying a jet near the ground instead does require some major skills, even for the most seasoned pilot.
Lei, che ha tante ore di esperienza di volo, riuscirebbe a portare questo aereo negli ultimi 500 metri, da qui a 850 km all'ora?
E dovrei metterci veramente tanto impegno. La prima difficoltà sarebbe quella di volare attaccato a terra. Lo so per esperienza diretta, avendo fatto volo militare a bassa quota.
Perché il terreno corre via.
Certo, corre a una velocità incredibile. Quindi credo che chi ha fatto questa attività possa capire cosa vuol dire stare a 10 metri a terra, 5 metri a terra con un aeroplano che pesa 110-120 tonnellate lanciato a 900 km all'ora. Basta toccare la close e schizza via.
Come si fa a pilotare un aereo a 530 miglia all'ora a rasoterra? È possibile?
Come diceva il collega, è estremamente difficile, è complesso, anche perché un piccolissimo intervento sul piano verticale fa salire o scendere l'aeroplano, per cui anche un pilota abbastanza allenato avrebbe delle grosse difficoltà.
The debunkers insist that the maneuver would have been doable even by an amateur like Hani Hanjour.
La manovra è tutt'altro che acrobatica, è una virata molto ampia.
Il y a des journalistes aux Pays-Bas qui ont dit on va voir, on va faire le test.
To prove their point, the debunkers refer to a documentary by Dutch television in which the Pentagon attack is replicated in a flight simulator.
Waar waarschuwt het vliegtuig nu voor?
Het vliegtuig waarschuwt dat de rolhoek iets te groot is, dus we hangen een klein beetje te schuin eigenlijk.
Zijn we nu ook aan het dalen?
Ja, we zijn vrij hard aan het dalen.
Dat is sneller dan gebruikelijk.
Het is iets harder dan normaal. Dit is de Pentagon, even een volgas.
Een gouden kusje.
En dan moet hij hier ongeveer aan deze vleugel moet hij erin verkennen.
But this simulation doesn't seem very accurate. First of all, the approach is made from a much higher angle, while the real plane came in so low that it clipped some of the light poles as it was flying at ground level. Secondly, the documentary doesn't offer precise indications on the speeds used during the simulation. In a more accurate simulation, done with a pilot with an experience similar to Hani Hanjour, the results were quite different.
Okay, you're 311 knots. You want to go all the way around?
Yeah, because I only get back towards the city here.
You can feel it right now. You feel the G-forces?
Yeah.
All right, go for it. Go towards it. You're 360 knots. There we go. You're 424 knots. And again, your radius of turn is becoming so great.
Yeah,
it's hard. Keep it turning, keep it turning, keep it turning. Keep it turning. Now go down. Dive for it. Yeah. There's 500 knots. Keep it going. It's very touchy. I can understand. Now you're going on your back. You're going on your back. Keep it rolling. Keep it rolling. You hit something, but obviously it was not that building. 370 knots.
Oh, come on. Hang on. I'm going to get him.
440 knots. You're going on your back.
I missed again. There's no denying it's incredibly difficult, especially with that turn that the NTSB data said Flight 77 made. And then he levels off and then pretty much just guns it straight in. That straight path right in is really incredibly difficult.
Correct. I couldn't do it. You couldn't do it. Not at that speed. Not at 500 knots.
In fact, the air traffic controllers were so impressed with the speed of the maneuver, they thought they were looking at a military jet.
But nobody knew that was a commercial flight at the time. Nobody knew that was American 77.
What did you think? It was a military flight of some kind?
I thought it was a military flight.
It was really moving fast.
It was moving very fast, like a military aircraft might move at a low altitude.
Air traffic controller Danielle O'Brien stated, the speed, the maneuverability, the way that he turned, we all thought in the radar room, all of us experienced air traffic controllers, that was a military plane. You don't fly a 757 in that manner. It's unsafe. Several military and civil pilots have expressed their skepticism about the maneuver. Commander Ralph Kolstad is a former fighter pilot, air flight instructor, and a retired commercial pilot with 27 years of experience. At the Pentagon, he stated, the pilot of the Boeing 757 did quite a feat of flying. I have 6,000 hours of flying in Boeing 757s and 767s, and could not have flown in the way the flight path was described. Commander Ted Muga, former civil and military pilot. I just can't imagine an amateur even being able to come close to performing a maneuver of that nature. Captain Russ Wittenberg, a former fighter pilot and an airline pilot for 35 years. For a guy to just jump into the cockpit and fly like an ace is impossible. There is not one chance in 1,000. To expect the alleged airplane to run these maneuvers with a total amateur at the controls is simply ludicrous.
To be able to fly that curving, descending, high airspeed trajectory into a very low building, you have to be Chuck Yeager to fly that trajectory.
Not only was Hani Hanjour no Chuck Yeager, but apparently he was a terrible pilot with small planes as well. An instructor from one of his flight schools stated, Hani Hanjour was not someone cut out to be a pilot. He had no motivation, a poor understanding of the basic principles of aviation, and poor judgment, combined with poor technical skills. The debunkers contend that Hanjour had obtained a regular pilot's license, and therefore he had to be able to fly. But it is exactly because of that license that major suspicions on Hanjour kept emerging. In a 2002 article called A Trainee Noted for Incompetence, the New York Times wrote that Hanjour was reported to the aviation agency after the instructors had found his piloting skills so shoddy and his grasp of English so inadequate that they questioned whether his pilot's license was genuine. The article concludes quoting a former employee at the flight school who said, I'm still to this day amazed that he could have flown into the Pentagon. He could not fly at all. The manager of another flight school in Phoenix said, I couldn't believe he had a commercial license of any kind with the skills that he had. At yet another flight school in Maryland, instructors found he had trouble controlling and landing the single-engine Cessna 172. This was confirmed in this radio interview by Neela Sagadevan, a pilot and an aeronautical engineer.
I got to say something about Hani Hanjour. I've spoken with two of his flight instructors. This guy could not solo a Cessna 150. It's a little single-engine two-seat trainer. And what I mean by solo, it's a pilot's first time out without anyone else in the cockpit with him. It's the most simple, most fundamental flying exercise one can engage in. You're seated inside the aircraft, you hit the bar, you take off, make a couple of 90-degree turns. maximum altitude of around 900 to 1,000 feet, come back and land.
You're saying this alleged hijacker, Honey Hunter, could not solo a 150?
He could not solo. In fact, one of his flight instructors, and I quote him, he said, the man could not fly at all.
How could an amateur who was deemed unable to fly solo in a Cessna 150, had a poor understanding of the basic principles of aviation, and had never sat once in the cockpit of a 757, suddenly become able to control such a large airliner flying at top speeds? And even assuming he was able to reach Washington with the autopilot, why would he want to disconnect it and hand fly the plane for another 8 long minutes, performing a totally unnecessary descending maneuver that A. would have drastically increased his chances of an unwanted crash, B. would have increased the danger of being intercepted, C. would have made him lose sight of the target again, D. would have forced him to a much more difficult approach near the ground, E. would have shrunk the target to a tiny strip of cement, F. would have limited the possible damage to the external rings only, when he could have maximized the damage and ensured the most spectacular outcome of the mission by plunging the plane onto the Pentagon's roofs from above. It should be noted that such an illogical maneuver from a terrorist's point of view becomes almost mandatory if seen from the opposite side of the chessboard. If the operation was in fact orchestrated by someone within the military, no one would want a 757 to plunge from the sky onto the Pentagon's roof. That would cause a major devastation, cost thousands of lives, and possibly kill generals and even the Secretary of Defense. To justify the claim of having been attacked, all that was needed was a strike on the side wall in a less populated area away from the top brass offices, where the number of casualties would be kept to a minimum. Maybe it's just a coincidence, but the area of the Pentagon that was hit with the strange maneuver not only satisfied all these requisites, but had just been reinforced in order to withstand a terrorist attack.
Exactly where the plane went in was an area that had recently been redeveloped with very heavy blast walls and firewalls. All the outside windows had been equipped with Kevlar coating to guard against blast. This portion of the building that had been remodeled, heavy blast walls put in. And the old portion had already been vacated in preparations of the remodeling effort, and the number of dead is probably considerably less than it would have been if this part of the Pentagon had been up to full staff. Fortunately, too, this is exactly the opposite side of all the critical command centers in the Pentagon, the Secretary of Defense's office, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs office, the National Military Command, where some of the most critical military decisions are made. Fortunately, they were all on the other side of the building.
The renovated section had just been reinforced by floor-to-ceiling steel beams that ran through all 5 floors. When the building section collapsed, the structure was held together by the web of 6x6-inch steel columns. Between these columns was a Kevlar-like mesh, similar to the material in bulletproof vests, which kept masonry from becoming shrapnel in case of an explosion. The suspicion that a strike on this section of the building was expected doesn't rest on the major beefing up of the structure alone. Apparently, the rumor of a strike on the external ring had already been circulating among the top ranks of the military. On September 11, Jim Miklaszewski was the NBC correspondent at the Pentagon.
The first time I heard the word terrorism out of any U.S. official came shortly after the second plane had hit. And I bumped into a U.S. military intelligence official, and I said, look, what have you got? And he said, obviously, this is clearly an act of terrorism. And then he got very close to me and almost silent for a few seconds, and he leaned in and he said, this attack was so well coordinated that if I were you, I would stay off the E-ring where our NBC office was, the outer ring of the Pentagon, the rest of the day, because we're next.
Question. Even if someone could predict that the Pentagon would become a target, one would imagine a plane to plunge from the skies onto the roofs of the building. Why would anyone suggest to stay away from the external ring in particular, unless he knew in advance what was going to happen?